The Federal Reserve has declared war on your salary and future pay raises. For the last year or so, the Federal Reserve has been fighting against inflation that has run strong in the economy. And a major component that they are looking at is the labor market. You see, right now, currently, the unemployment rate in the US is historically low, which leads for a tight labor market. Now, the concern there for the Fed is that that gives a lot of power to workers.
I'm in control now and I have the power.
Which means that workers have more position to ask for pay raises or move to other jobs to get a salary increase that way. And that competition in the labor market means that firms will ultimately have higher costs, right? Higher labor costs to produce their goods and services. And when they incur those higher costs, guess what? Yep, they pass them on to you, the consumer. So that increases the price of those goods, right? Which is inflation. So the Fed is concerned about a mechanism known as the wage price spiral, which is this theory that talks about when demand is high and unemployment is low, firms have to bid against one another for labor, and workers feel more confident about asking for pay raises or getting salary increases as they switch jobs. That puts higher costs on the firms, which then pass that on to the customers. Inflation rises, and then the workers who had higher wages now sort of experience a loss in real wages because they face higher prices. So they go back and they ask for higher wages yet again. And the spiral continues as more prices are added. You can kind of think of it like a hamster wheel where you're sort of running in place. You're getting a higher wage, but you're facing higher prices. So you're really moving nowhere. The wage price spiral seems like a scary thing, which is why the Fed is worried about it. But the question is really, should we be worried about it? Like, is there any evidence that it's actually happening? Thankfully, it is something that has been empirically studied. There are two different analyses that I want to look at today that I think are relevant for the current situation. The first one is by the Cleveland Federal Reserve Bank, so a member of the Federal Reserve, who did an analysis. It's a bit older, about 23 years ago now, but they looked at this idea of, do wages cause inflation? And they looked at other studies that had happened prior, and the overall results showed that they were not able to find this causality where wages were causing inflation to happen. They're definitely correlated, they move closely together, but in their analysis, they actually found the opposite, that increasing wages do not cause inflation, but inflation drives increases in wages. The second analysis was done by the International Monetary Fund recently. They were looking at similar historical economic situations to the one currently occurring in the US, which is essentially we have this rising inflation and our nominal wages are increasing as well, but we actually have real wages and unemployment rates that are flat or falling. And in the case of their analysis, they looked at 22 different situations and found that wage price spirals did not develop in any of those cases that were similar to the current situation that we're faced with here in the US. What's interesting to me is that real wages are essentially flat or stagnant. Actually, looking at the Dallas Federal Reserve, they estimated that real wages fell by 8.5% in the second quarter of 2022. That real negative wage growth means that workers don't have the income to put sort of aggregate demand pressure on the economy. So why is the Federal Reserve targeting the labor market so aggressively? Well, I think it's because they want to have a comprehensive view when they're tackling the inflation problem. Wages could be a component of it, but there are a lot of other factors that are definitely driving inflation as well. Things like supply side issues, energy prices, and other factors that drive inflation. By specifically calling out the labor market, the Federal Reserve is signaling to the economy that they are going to be addressing inflation. Prices and wages tend to be sticky. That is, they take time to react to the Federal Reserve's monetary policy changes. So they're trying to get ahead of it as fast as they can to make sure that inflation expectations for the future are set appropriately. If you want to learn more about inflation expectations, you can check out my other video. I'll put a link to it up in the top right there on the card. But looking at the data, we don't see evidence of wage price spirals in the current situation, which ultimately means it's going to be harder for the American worker. Bank account is going to be leaner for the foreseeable future. The data does show over time, real wages do catch up to inflation. But of course, that doesn't help you now, and you're not going to be compensated for that loss of disposable income in the future. It just means you're going to be made par at some point. Hopefully that offers some insight on the labor market and inflation. Thanks for watching.